designing and advising on gardens and gardening. He teaches at Cambridge University Botanic Garden. He's also a Chelsea Flower Show medal winner. So Paul's talk today is on gardening for health and explores the therapeutic benefits of nature and gardening in general. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I've got a slideshow, but we can get distracted on any slide change. So don't sit and, if you've got questions, just fire them in. If it just resonates, then fire them in. I want to keep this informal and chatty, really. Otherwise, I'll just stand here and spat and feel really self-conscious. So yeah, that's my background. I was a psychiatric nurse before doing all of that for donkey's years. So kind of the well-being aspect of horticulture is really important to me. So my last role in the NHS was triaging GP referrals into the mental health service. And then I scarpered from there and set up Grow Places, which in the starting point was doing lots of therapeutic horticulture projects. So working with people with physical and mental health issues using horticulture. So I don't know if people know Nightingale Park on Nightingale, the wreck there. Yeah. So have you been? Yeah. So that was a project for, oh God, I'm distracted already and haven't even started a slide. So that was a project back in 2016, I think we started. So it was an old bowling green and it had been closed up for a number of years because there'd been loads of bowling greens around Cambridge and the demographic was older people, right? And they were slowly dying off and so there wasn't the membership. So they kind of incorporated some bowling clubs together and that one lapsed. And it was shut up for ages. And so actually the grass, bowling green grass, when you let grow out, grows to this height. It's the finest, most beautiful thing. But we had a link with the city council and they looked after the place and they were wanting to trial a number of strategies to reduce their gardening regimes around Cambridge. So we became a test bed for stuff. If I ever get to the end of the slides, there's some slides of it at the end. At this rate, I'm not even going to start the slides. But yeah, so I worked with a number of groups of people working in that environment. It was really interesting because there was no water and we had no money, but we just kind of experimented really to see what grew. Yeah. I better start, don't I? Dive in with any thoughts. Andrea sent me this slide yesterday. I'm really impressed. Is there anybody here from this green, what's it called? Sorry. Green Committee. Why aren't they here? They seem to be the experts. So is it a group of people who've been kind of clocking is this just a snapshot in one season or? I mean, I'm really impressed.
I'm not an expert on it, but it's got at the top there the environmental survey. I think it's all to do with when we were setting up the but we have a green committee who are a group of people around the lab and they look at what we're doing from a green perspective.
Fine. Yeah, good stuff. Have you got a pond then? There's pond skaters somewhere there. Do you get to chill out there? Lunch breaks and stuff. So I want to start with this. Do people know Andy Goldsworthy? Andy Goldsworthy is an artist, sculptor, environmentalist, photographer. He creates art out of found objects in that immediate landscape. So that's one of his, it's in water. So there's a water line and a mirror image. So this is a quote from Andy Goldsworthy, which I think we all forget our role in nature. Nature's not something separate from us. So when we say we've lost our connection to nature, we've lost our connection to ourselves. That's a key thing for me. Often when I'm kind of working gardening projects with other people, it's as much about working with the people as it is about the garden itself. That just becomes a vehicle for it. Right, a bit of ancient history. Back in the Ice Age, or at the end of the Ice Age, we had a different relationship to our landscapes. So we had hunters and gatherers strutting their stuff, and conveniently, we've got both. Hunters, buck, gatherers, scrat, right? Okay. And then once the Ice Age started receding, then the soil warmed up and people then started to take on farming as a role and kind of settling in one place. So, climate change was a big key driver of a change in the way communities were working together and using the land. And it's all very appropriate now with climate change being such a huge issue. I want to show you this. This is called Ecological Succession. You might know about it already. So this is what happens if you don't do anything to a bit of land. So you can start off with rocks, get inhabited by lichens and mosses, then you get annual weeds turning into perennial weeds and grasses, into shrubs, into kind of pioneer trees, into more mature trees. And at the point you get to the big stuff, then it's called a succession community. And the only thing which changes that is if a tree was to die or if a branch was to fall off or get struck by lightning. And then a little shaft of light goes into the canopy floor again, and the whole process in that bit starts again. So if we don't garden spaces, that's what happens. Already had conversations about gardens full of brambles and stuff. Here's another artist, Herman de Vries. Do people know him? He's a land artist. He specializes, or did at this stage, with enclosing a bit of land and then doing nothing to the middle of it. So he built this brick and stone structure. It's got 4 little stone windows. Can you see one here? You can't. Oh yeah, there. Disguised by the graffiti. So people could look in but not get in. And inside he just left bare soil. And over time, he just charted what grew in that space. And so you end up with these trees, and those trees will get bigger and bigger, and then until lightning, old age does for them, and then the process can start again. So our role as gardeners is really editing nature. And we kind of think we've got absolute control, and there are various degrees of absolute control and various personalities with absolute control. We've already talked about the amazingly perfectly striped lawn, and our relationship to our gardens can vary hugely. Actually, it's these blokes who've got the most amazing, perfectly striped lawn with no weeds in it. Unless there's any women who are going to say, no, it's me. Anybody lawn champions here? Good, because they kind of... Actually, the worst lawn I ever worked with was a client just south of Cambridge. And she had the most perfect lawn. She had one of those lawn care companies coming in 5 times a year. Spent a fortune on them. The lawn was immaculate. She'd never let me cut the grass or do the edging. I was doing some gardening stuff for her, and it was just absolutely perfect. But the amount of chemicals going into that soil just to get that is shocking, really. And then we're talking about mowers, petrol mowers, right? And there was a Swedish study done a while ago which said that for every hour of mowing with a petrol mower is the equivalent of driving 100 miles in a car in terms of the pollution it produces. There's petrol mowers that don't have catalytic converters and stuff, so hold that in mind when you're... And of course, you know, we've had this ridiculously horrible weather for ages and we can't do any mowing, and then suddenly the sun comes out and it gets a bit drier, and then you wake up and there's just this cacophony of flipping mowing stuff. Right, what's our role with all of this? Our link with nature, our link with our gardens. I want to show you this stuff. Now, this is old-fashioned stuff. Maslow's hierarchy. This comes from the late 50s, or early 60s, I think. And so our relationship to our environment was very much this kind of pyramid hierarchy of physiological stuff, you know, like food and water and breathing and sleep, and then going up to security, a roof over our heads, and going up to what he called self-actualization. It's all horribly linear, and we don't work in that way at all, I don't think. Whereas now we've got this, which is self-determination theory. So we've got 3 basic needs. So there's competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And it's the interaction of all of those which create fulfilling lives for us, hopefully. And a big part of that is our relationship to our environment and our relationship to other people. A lot of the stuff I've done is about kind of helping people relate to each other through the use of environment. So we read this loads, don't we, that the Amazon forest produces so much, you know, it's the lungs of the planet, and if it's wrong, it's bad science. It produces proper, I don't know, the stats vary, maybe 5% of the oxygen needed, whereas the bigger creator of oxygen is phytoplankton, so lay down on the seabed over kind of long periods of time. But I mean, we do get oxygen from trees, there's no doubt about it. Originally, kind of our linked gardens would have been around food production and survival. I get carried away, get kind of distracted by kind of food chains and food webs. So food chain is an individual creature's kind of the succession of what eats what in the food chain, whereas the food web is the intermingling of all those creatures together. And tellingly, if the things lower down in the food chain disappear or aren't available in the same quantities, it has a huge knock-on effect on the people, animals higher up in the food chain. And we're seeing that increasingly now. So if we look at some of our invertebrates, then this is the decline we're experiencing. 71% of our butterflies are declining, 60% of our moths, long-term decline, 50% of our native bumblebees are declining. Does anybody have memories of driving along in the summer and your windscreen looks like that? God, that looks disgusting on such a large screen. Move on. We just don't get that anymore, do we? The amount of insects in the air in our gardens is much reduced. And it's serious, right? Because 90% of wild plants, 75% of our leading global crops need pollination from animals, mostly bees, some moths, range of animals, but mostly bees, moths. Out of every 3 mouthfuls of our food, 1 out of every 3 mouthfuls of our food depend on pollinators such as bees, and crops depend on pollination 5 times more valuable than those that do not. And our bees are vanishing hugely. So, and this is why. Habitat loss, we've lost 97% of our wildflower meadows since World War II. I mean, that's a huge amount, and we're still losing them. And the challenge is, I mean, there's a lot of people interested in growing wildflower meadows now, and yet it's not a quick fix and it's not easy. You know, we could look online and we could look at like Chelsea Flower Show or whatever inspirations, or Monty Don we were talking about before we started, and they kind of give you this kind of recipe and you go, okay, and you have a go and nothing happens. Like no mow May, for instance, you just grow long grass, right? In no mow May, it takes longer to establish anything more interesting coming through generally, unless you're really lucky. Habitat loss is a big deal. Climate change, it's disrupting the bees' nesting behavior. And when they come out after winter, sometimes if it gets mild, get a mild spell, which we're often getting in the middle of winter, bees can become more active, then it gets cold again, and then they get nuked by the cold and die back. And also it has a knock-on effect of when our plants are flowering now. The seasons are getting a bit crazy. The seasonal change is getting really interesting. I mean, just this year, we've had such a dark and wet spring that it's only recently that we're starting to see flowers being produced on a lot of our plants, because they've just sat there thinking it's too cold, it's not bright enough, it's not warm enough, I'm not doing anything. And the unpredictability of climate change is going to stay with us forever, I think, and it's really hard to plan a garden now. Toxic pesticides, intensive farming and crop care regimes. There are so many crops now which are dependent on a whole strategy of nuking the soil, very particular fertilizers, very particular insecticides just for that crop to be viable. And a lot of these chemicals are just causing huge problems. I mean, it's glyphosate family, that Roundup and stuff that you can get yourselves, and people use a lot. And actually, when we did this link with the city council looking at reducing their mowing, I mean, they use shed loads of the stuff because it's cheap and it's quicker than manpower just to get rid of weeds in paving and stuff. And yet it is, well, officially it's probably carcinogenic. I mean, I've known people who were spraying that stuff before it was properly known how to look after themselves, and they did get cancers from it. But even for us, spray it at the wrong time of day, spray it when it's too windy, it can kind of spread. And they've now noticed that it's kind of getting into our water systems now and persisting in the water systems. When you read stuff on the packet, it often says, yeah, this will become dormant in the soil in this period of time. It doesn't. So hold that in mind when you're struggling with your garden and trying to keep on top of it. And then various diseases of bees are around now. So there's this thing called varroa, mite, and various fungal diseases that bees are being affected by. So they're having a hard time. And I think a lot of us are now turning our gardens into kind of wildlife focus prioritising that, and the look of the garden can change significantly doing that. Gone are the days when we should be tidying everything up neatly in the autumn time before winter, for example. Let things just persist and let the wildlife enjoy the seed heads and the cover and the shelter that those remaining stems and seed heads and leaves create. And then there's this lockdown, right? Lockdown was huge for people getting into gardening, often for the first time. So the stats were really interesting. I mean, this isn't a huge sample. It's only 2,500 people from the National Garden Scheme. I don't know why they commissioned the report. It wasn't their normal thing. I guess they didn't have gardens to open for the public, did they? Because it's this time of year when all of that's happening. So maybe they thought they'd conduct some research. This is September 2020. And this is their feedback they got of the questions that people were asked about their gardens. So the value of people's garden spaces was really important. And people with tiny balconies, window boxes, those people who were in an urban or suburban environment, talked a lot about the reduction of stress. So it's a tiny window box, right? You don't need a huge garden to be able to get some of these benefits. 86% said they used their garden more in lockdown. 81% spent their time growing and propagating seeds. I live in Fulbourn, and I know loads of people in the village who did that for the first time in lockdown. And then suddenly nobody could buy seeds. In fact, nobody could buy anything at that point. As soon as people were allowed out. See, my landscaper, Jim, who builds most of my gardens, has a link with Madingley Mulch. And he buys a lot of the kind of soil conditioner and compost and stuff that we use in the gardens from there. And they stopped selling it to him because they could get higher prices from the general public who were coming in their droves to buy this stuff. It was amazing, frustrating, but it was great that the public were responding in such a big way to appreciating their garden space. Does that apply to people here? Do people start gardening in lockdown, or did it change your patterns of gardening in lockdown? Yeah? Right. I'm still hooked?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Did very well this year.
This year's been a weird year.
Two. The whole tray. But yeah.
Right.
Love it.
Look at that. Yeah, she does. You can tell by the look on her face. She loves it. Right. Bits of research. This is a bit dry, but you can look this stuff up and you'll have access to the slides and it'll have all the links. Just viewing nature. This isn't active gardening yet. This is just looking at it. You don't have to lift a finger. You could just sit out in your deck chair or just go for a walk. Here's some bits of research. So, more beneficial physiologically to view a green hedge than a concrete fence. I mean, it kind of goes without saying really, but people have researched this stuff. Viewing plants alters EEG recordings and reduce stress, fear, anger, and sadness, as well as reducing blood pressure, pulse rate, and muscle tension. It's just looking at a plant, right? Michigan prison, and this actually crops up in a number of prison research projects. Residents who had a view of the countryside from themselves use the prison medical services less than those with an internal courtyard view. And actually in Sweden, they found in a prison that actually the rate of recidivism, I say that right, recidivism reduced. So there was much less hassle for the prison guards, wardens, whatever, than they would normally get from that group of people, just because people had a glimpse of nature. And then it's post-operative. This was a big bit of research done ages ago, back in the 80s. Views of plants and trees from post-operative wards improve the mood of patients, reduce analgesic use, surgical complications, and length of stay. To the extent that there's an NHS kind of forest group now looking at outdoor spaces in NHS surroundings, who even Addenbrooke's with its ridiculously overdeveloped site has, oh no, that's a challenge. Do I go down that route? Yeah. A while ago, I was looking at creating a garden on the Addenbrooke site, got invited to look at various things. And so we were going to do a roof garden at first. And we kind of went a certain way down the development of that. And then suddenly the roof garden wasn't available anymore because they'd just put some air conditioning plant on top of it. And then we were going to do another garden in a space, though, that ended up with porta cabins on. And eventually we were told that we can have a garden space for like maybe 2 years, they said. I said, it's not worth doing it for 2 years. They're only going to be growing in 2 years. So it was frustrating. Anybody's got any links with Addenbrooke's and any available green spaces? Because like Maggie's at Addenbrooke, oh God, this is a tangent and a half. Maggie's cancer centres are all the way around the country, right? Really famous for their kind of work supporting people with cancer diagnosis. Lots of kind of alternative therapies woven into their kind of normal therapies. And most of them, all of them, have got the most amazing garden spaces designed by the most amazing garden designers, high-end garden designers, people like Dan Pearson, except for next door here. They don't even have an outdoor space like that. It's very sad. This is another curious one. I don't know why we're back in Sweden. Swedish research is quite extensive. So in a psychiatric hospital, they had an art gallery, they had a wall of art, and the only art that got vandalized, the only art which didn't get vandalized, quite a problematic patient group from what I could read, was the pictures of landscapes and nature. So there was an appreciation just on a level, even when we're kind of out of it, that we tuned into by the sound of it. And then this is what kickstarted me doing my therapeutic horticulture stuff. So the King's Fund, who were kind of advisors to the NHS in lots of different ways, came up with a bit of research, gardens and health implications for policy and practice back in 2016. And so they're looking at how we could take advantage of the Brits' love affair with gardening and looking at social prescribing, which is GPs prescribing people's access into garden spaces, which I did a lot of with the Nightingale Project, community gardens, which it became, volunteering, recovery from illness, dementia care, end-of-life care. So they identified a whole load of ways that a link with nature, a link with gardening could kind of boost, support people's health and reduce the cost and the load on the clinical services, which is increasingly needed. My project at Nightingale Park was European Social Fund funded. It was very strange because in theory I was Ofsted and Spectable for just digging and sitting drinking cups of tea in the sunshine and stuff. But yeah, Brexit did for European Social Fund links for us, so sadly. Professor Tim Lang, Centre for Food Policy at City University London, came up with some research which looked at the benefits of kind of more formal projects. Increasing levels of physical activity, fitness, burning calories, blah, 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 reducing risk of obesity, you know, just gets us moving in a way that actually a bunch of people who might not want to go down the gym or have a more formalized exercise regime will find, you know, just the distraction of being in a garden space that they're kind of moving and digging and stuff without even thinking about it. And that was my experience, certainly, of running the groups. Increase healthy fruit and vegetable consumption. So people who grow the stuff will eat it and will appreciate it more. If we don't grow it, we don't appreciate it in the same way. There's a lot of school projects around now, which I think are still persisting. Certainly, the ones that I know of are still persisting. They started kind of through lockdown of growing stuff and they carried on. There's usually a key teacher that's into that and trying to change young people's attitudes towards healthy eating. And actually supporting those young people to change their parents' attitudes towards healthy eating too, which is interesting. And then reduction of physical pain, help with rehab, recovery from surgery, and helping people cope with challenging circumstances like cancer treatments, living with chronic conditions. So all of that. And then mental health improvement. Social interactions are increased, community cohesion, reducing the occurrence of episodes of stress, depressions. My groups were interesting. I had one group really where I had one guy in one group. He was vociferous about how much he hated the mental health services. He was adamant that they had done nothing positive for him in the least. He didn't realize that I had worked for mental health services and I didn't say anything for quite a while. But I knew that also in the group I had a psychiatrist who had mental health issues and she had to stop working because of her mental health issues. And she was soaking this stuff up for a while and didn't engage with it. And I think she was quite intimidated by it. So my role was just to kind of gather the group together. And we did a lot of sitting around drinking tea and eating cake. I got some mentorship from the Eden Project years ago, and they said, if you provide cake, people will come. And it actually does work. If you've got any projects you want to do, just feed them a cake and people come. And so suddenly in this conversation, there was one day we're sitting around in the sunshine, drinking tea and eating cake. And he started saying something. And then she just quietly said something which just cut through everything for him. Because he suddenly realized that here was a person that he got to know and really liked, and they worked together really well. And she was a lot more than just the title that she might have had. And the realization that, oh, so you can get married too, can you? You're thinking, yeah. Yeah, it was really powerful. Reduced reliance on meds, self-harming behavior, visits to psychiatric services, improving alertness, cognitive abilities, social skills, all of that stuff I've seen in action hugely, hugely. Alleviate symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's, such as agitation, aggressive behavior. I think some of that is just about giving people space so they're not cooped up. My dad was a huge gardener and he got dementia and he got looked after at home a lot longer than he should have done, really, because he was quite a handful. But being outdoors was very calming for him because I think he just had this instinctive memory of that environment and what it could do for him. Interesting, colour. If you've got anyone in the family with dementia, often we think that the calming colours for gardens are the whites and the pale pinks and the pale blues and maybe the nice purples, that palette. Everybody aspires to that palette. But actually one colour that's really calming, restful for people with dementia is yellow. It's really interesting.
I watched Ellen Titchmarsh thing the other day.
Oh, yeah.
The lady was losing her sight.
Right.
Funny enough, she could see hues of red. So the garden he did for her was predominantly red.
Oh, that's very interesting. Red. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, our perceptions are so different, and it's just, if you're gardening for yourself, then I just encourage everybody I teach just to go 100% with what you want. Even if it's wildly eccentric, just do it, really. Sometimes we get this legacy of inheriting someone else's garden and you kind of feel, oh, I'm a custodian of this, and you don't know kind of what they did or how it worked. And it's okay, just do it your way, really. Yeah, such a creative act. Productive managed activity works really well with people with drug and alcohol dependencies. And just end of life care. I've done work in hospices and in old people's homes, and yeah, just if I was going to end my life somewhere institutional, I just want to be able to be wheeled out into a garden space and just feel that, really. Sensory stimulation. This is a big deal for us as gardeners, right? All the senses. And by all, I mean not just the 5 that we know about. Various research shows that there's kind of 53 of them. I'm just gonna let it scroll by. There's just flipping loads of them. All of these are different senses, all of which. That's going too fast, sorry. I didn't know how to pitch the timing of that one, and I clearly got it quite right. That would just go round and round forever.
So I keep on reading.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I'm not used to reading from the bottom up, so I keep looking up there and then.
I know, it's a bit like watching the credits at the end of the film. And the only thing I could find in PowerPoint, it wouldn't do it the other way around. Are there any PowerPoint experts here? I could pick your brains and see if you could get it to scroll the other way, because I had to reverse everything to get it to work. Right. Why gardening is good for your health. So, gardening can be a workout. So they say 3 hours of moderate gardening equals 1 full hour in the gym based on the amount of calories burnt. And you can reduce the risk of heart attacks by this amount and death from any cause, it says boldly. I love that. From any cause by 30%. Reduces the likelihood of obesity by these percentages, more for men than for women. Does that mean we're fatter than what? I don't know what that's about. Looking at lower BMI. Happier bacteria, stuff in the soil, has been found to trigger the release of serotonin, which is a mood lifter. You don't have to eat it, don't worry. It's just, you can just smell and touch and stuff. But there are people who eat soil. People know anyone who eats soil? I've known pregnant women who've eaten soil. Oh, you're right. Is that you?
My nan ate soil when she was pregnant with mum.
Did she? Did she know why, or was it just an instinctive thing that she felt?
She just said she went out in the garden, had a little nibble, and then carried on a day.
Fabulous. Anybody else? Soil eating? Go on.
Oh, fabulous.
Better diet. I think when we grow our own stuff, we're much more tuned into how we grow it, what chemicals we're using or not using, the seasonality too of produce. Stress relief, reduction in stress. So seemingly, measurements of perceived stress, right? If you're an allotment gardener, you're winning really. Home gardeners winning slightly less, and then indoor exercises not winning quite so much. Cognitive challenges, protecting our brain against aging. For these reasons, visuospatial skills, executive functioning, memorization. And apparently there's a 36% reduction in dementia risk for regular gardeners. Didn't work for my dad. Improved memory. Not sure that's working for me these days. But yeah, so that's the stuff that's out there and talked about a lot. And we did get onto the pictures. Look, this is Nightingale Park. So this is some of my gardening group. So on the left-hand side, there was this wildflower meadow that we planted up. And if you look right at the back, can you see the tall stuff right at the back? That's cosmos, right? That was one bed of cosmos, which usually gets to about that sort of height, doesn't it? This picture was taken end of November. It was a really mild season, and that cosmos was 7-8 feet high. People would flock and just have their photos taken in front of it. It was stunning. And so these guys were gathering seed so that we could sow them the next year. Yeah, wheelchair users in the space was a challenge. We had this old clubhouse. It used to be the old bowling hut, but it had a very flimsy wooden floor. And this wheelchair weighed a ton and we couldn't get it in. It would have broken the floor. And so she gamely gardened with us all the way through the winter time with various layers on. And Louise with the dog and the red wheelchair, she was a laugh. She was from Yorkshire, amazing sense of humor. Vicious dog though. But she would overreach herself. I'd bought all these tools with long handles so she could garden without overreaching herself. Usually at some point, every weekly session, we ran a session for 3 hours once a week for like 3 months in groups. She'd fall off. And you just hear these kind of guffaws and giggles coming from somewhere. Have to go and find her and put her back into a chair. She always bounced, but yeah. And this guy standing there, he was a social worker working in mental health for many years until one day when he drove a patient, an unwell patient, to Fulbourn Hospital. Patient grabbed the steering wheel of the car crashed. He ended up with brain trauma. He never worked again ever since. And he wouldn't engage in any group activities for ages. He would just stand on the periphery and just said, Paul, give me a job to do. And he wanted digging. He wanted to get rid of stress and stuff. He was angry, right? Understandably angry. But eventually he would start to engage and we kind of got him integrated and people then realized what his background was and he talked a lot about the skills he had. This picture there is people, we were given these foxgloves from the Botanic Gardens. They were really good at letting us have kind of their overspill. And so we were planting them in. This guy in the foreground was another guy who didn't engage with anybody for ages. And then he went on to volunteer with the open spaces team doing projects, which was a great success. And he's still doing it. I saw him out there the other week, still doing it. So these are results. And the most important bit of the gardening was those white chairs you can see at the top. That's where we'd sit and have tea breaks. And there'd be fruit and cake and cups of tea and juices and stuff. And sometimes if people didn't want to garden, they'd just come and chat there. And people would wander in and say, can I do a bit? We get like Adam Brooks staff who come in on an extended break sometimes and say, oh, that looks interesting. Can I have a go? And go, yeah. And so the groups became inclusive of anybody who wanted to do it. And now it's running itself as a thriving community garden, which is kind of credit to these guys getting it started, really. What's next? Oh yeah, this is Denby Ward on the Fulbourn Hospital site. So it's a garden for people with dementias. It's an assessment area for people with dementias. And so we took a bunch of people then to do some planting up. Some of these people were had been involved in previous projects. Some of them had done the gardening health group. Some of these were kind of staff team members. Again, an interesting way to get people to come together to garden. Now, this is a care home up in St Ives. where it was brand new, right? When I got there, it was 2 years old, and nobody had thought to design the garden so that people in big wheelchairs or even the beds, because they had an end-of-life care unit, which stupidly was right on the top floor. And so they couldn't get into the garden. The paths weren't wide enough. The radiuses of the curves were too tight. And so we got some money from Tesco's and changed it to the extent that you ended up with bigger seating areas like that. And then they did things like this. So we got chickens in. It's not quite gardening, but you know, it's a lovely environment to have. And then on the left was they took on an allotment. They're taking bunches of their residents up to the allotment to do gardening there regularly too.
Is that Field Lodge?
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you know?
Well, I visit somebody there.
Oh, do you? Yeah, yeah.
Mum goes with them.
Oh, cool. Yeah, Field Lodge. Yeah.
That's Sam.
Yeah, it is Sam. Sam's famous, right?
Sam's really famous.
Sam's a star.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sam's an absolute star. Yeah. Yeah. So I was there. Oh, God. I can't remember. Years ago. Yeah, it was 2 years old back then. Yeah. Right, I'm not going to show you any more slides because I want to find out what questions you guys have got. Sit somewhere I can see you. Stand over here, sorry. I'll move and then I'll talk to you guys as well. I'm not being rude. Questions? Because that's a snapshot of all sorts of disparate stuff. So don't be shy. No questions. Is it just lunchtime now?
What point in your kind of gardening journey, from when you were just gardening at home to what you're doing now,
Yeah.
did you realise, okay, this is actually benefiting you?
I think I took that for granted always. And it was only when I started using it when I worked as a psychiatric nurse. I worked in daycare for a lot and we had a garden and that was just neglected. So just because it was neglected, we just took it on. And I kind of just seeing other people relating to it got me understanding how I relate, what the value was for me. I think I just took it for granted in a way. Yeah. I mean, gardening with my dad was challenging because he was just a stickler for this is the way to do it. And if you don't do it my way, well, clear off and do something else kind of thing. Often I cleared off and did something else. I was far more arty and he was very much, this is the way to do it. So it was a double-edged sword in a way, but kind of, I think people find gardening for different reasons, don't they? And I think there is a critical age often, you know, when people start to get kind of partners and families and stuff and gardens become of interest, which is exactly at the point when those kids are going to trash everything you try and do in your garden and it's really frustrating. But yeah, just being outside, I think lockdown was a kind of a wake-up call for so many people. You know, nature got louder, traffic noise reduced, and I think people just got interested in their tiny bit of space that they could get into without having to, you know, just do that half an hour exercise thing. Yeah. Yeah.
It says, which is the happiest plant?
The happiest plant. Well, the technical bit of my head would say that it's the plant in the right place. Because instinctively, and garden centres don't help, we go to a garden centre and they only sell stuff which is in flower, right? And we buy one of something and we'll just think, oh, that looks nice, I'll pop it in somewhere and see how it does. And sometimes it's fine, and sometimes, and plants tolerate all sorts of abuse, but sometimes they just won't survive and they'll die. So the happiest plant, which is one which has got the right soil, the right amount of moisture in the soil for it, the right amount of sunshine for it. Very dull answer. If it wasn't that, then I would say the happiest plant in terms of me with my boys gardening is sunflowers, because they have like a competition every year to see. So, you know, and they're just so cheerful, right? So Jazz has got two answers. You can pick whichever one. But honestly, we don't put the right plants in the right place at all. We just opportunistically buy something because it looks nice, pop it in our trolleys, go through the till, take it home, put it in a space, and without any sense of where it comes from, how big it's going to get, how tall it's going to get, when it's going to be in flower, when it's not going to be in flower, all of that stuff. There's so much research we can do about every single plant to make sure that it's happy. Go for it.
I think something that most people are not probably would have
window box space was the increase in garden birds, so
Yes,
it was at home to see them.
yes,
Through the kitchen window, but secondly, because there was less traffic on the roads, the birds came back.
yes,
Have remained.
yes.
Which is nice. So what planting do you suggest to encourage?
I think before you encourage birds, you've got to think about the whole food chain thing, the food webs. And so you need to get the foods that the birds want to get the birds to come in. We can feed birds with seeds and nuts and stuff, and that's fine. But if we can support some planting in our garden that gets the insect life in, that the birds will come in, then that's even more important. I mean, the best thing if you're doing a wildlife garden is to get water in your garden in some way. And it could be a tiny amount. I mean, at Nightingale Park, we wanted for ages to put in a big pond and eventually got some Section 106 money to do it. But in the first instance, we remember once we just left out a kind of a saucer. It rained and it filled with water, and the next day there was a frog sitting in the middle of it. And then with all the digging of the pond happening immediately next to that, the frog stayed in this thing. And so we just dug it a slightly different little pond and put a little mesh on the top so nobody disturbed it when they were looking. So, you know, wildlife doesn't need anything fancy, but water starts that cycle of kind of insects coming in, birds coming in. Yeah. Yeah. So it's the whole food chain thing. The birds are relatively high up in it, so it's encouraging. Yeah. Anyone got hedgehogs in their garden? I don't see some. Have you? Oh,
It's two.
that's good.
I've never seen more than two, but I'm pretty sure that our moth sizes don't always line up. I've never seen more than two at the same time.
Brilliant. Oh, they're so hard to find these days. Yeah.
They really like, we put mealworms out for birds sometimes, and the hedgehog just go in immediately for birds.
Oh, I bet. Oh, you're looking after them really well. Nice.
I have a question from my.
Ooh, oh, pressure's on. Your dad's a big gardener, right?
Well, I'll admit it's my plant and I've nearly killed it. So he said, how do you say the dying calathea for a prayer plant?
Do you know why it's dying?
Because I looked after it.
And what did you do? Did you under or overwater it?
Well, it was propagated off my partner's plant.
Okay.
So he tried to take it out of the soil to essentially propagate it again. So he said the roots were actually quite small, so we could shift the blame onto my partner there.
There we go, sorted. But you're feeling guilty still.
Yeah, a little bit. So is there any point in him? So he's got bottled water as opposed to water from the tap, because our tap water is quite high.
Yeah, it's always worth using rainwater.
Yeah.
The acidity levels, the alkalinity levels are very different. Our tap water is very alkali. I think the standards for tap water is something between pH of 6.5 and 9, so it's very alkali.
Yeah.
Whereas our rainwater is more acidic
So
than that. So,
would you say
and less
there's any
chemicals
point in him essentially propagating it again.
oh, there's always hope, isn't there? Gardeners hang on to the most manky specimens for so
Yeah.
long. Gardeners will go to those kind of racks in garden centres where the stuff's sold off and it's a British psyche, isn't it? You take pity on this half-dead thing and you bring it home and you kind of nurture it far longer than you need to. And yeah, I give it one other go and then I just bin it. I'm ruthless. You see, the connection with plants is interesting too, because there's history with plants. We might get a cutting from somebody, it's special significance. And even if it doesn't fit into our amazing overall garden design, right, it's special. The memories attached to it. Even like scent of plants, we can get a scent of something and it can transport you back to scents you experienced when you were kids really quickly. It's powerful stuff. So yeah, there's mostly always hope. How are we doing for time? Are we okay? Did talk for, I'll just rub it on for ages. More questions, go on, you can do it. I'm going to stand over here. This lot have questions. You've got questions? No? Domestic team would have questions.
We encourage our young to enjoy the garden.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, yeah. What have you tried? Oh, she said aside.
Leading by example, just by doing it.
Yeah.
They just don't seem interested at all.
How old are they?
They're older, they're 25 and 18.
Oh yeah, they're past it now.
Oh, my
You've got to
God.
wait till they're 40 now. Yeah.
That's what I thought.
If you get them young, you can tune into, just edible stuff is really interesting. And also bug watching is really interesting for little
Yes.
Liz.
I used to
Yeah.
work in the primary school.
Ah,
and I used to
yeah,
do
yeah.
the gardening.
Yeah.
And we used to go out and pick the strawberries and
Yeah.
everything. They just have them on the snack table.
Yeah.
They loved it.
Yeah. If you can get them at that age, then you can hope that it will
Yeah.
persist through
I've always got
screens and stuff in the virtual world. But yeah, once they get into that sort of age, they'll find it maybe when they've got their own kids or, when they've got a house with a garden, they go, oh, what do we do with this? And suddenly you'll be the expert to come around and do all the work for them. Yeah. But having said that, through lockdown, there were a lot of people who were experimenting for the first time with it and had a real appreciation of homegrown stuff, particularly a real sense of satisfaction that they did it. And it's one of the most powerful things to do is to grow something that turns into something you can eat and it lives. And yeah, I think people appreciated that in a really different way.
Get that with the seeds. Or you put a bulb in and you see something growing.
But what age did that kick in for you?
Like you say, when you get your first
There you
one.
go, you see. So take the pressure off everybody and just go, okay, off you go. They'll be back and you'll be the expert. And then you can go, told you so. Yeah.
Are you equally keen on indoor plants?
No, I kill them regularly. Yeah, I'm rubbish with indoor plants. Why do I kill them? I think, I don't have the right windowsill space for the plants to flourish a lot of the time. And if I applied my theory of kind of outdoor plants and gardening to indoors, then I would be only choosing plants that would thrive. I know I've just said something that contradicts myself earlier. But windowsills have all sorts of stuff. My windowsills are full of stones and shells and things that kids have put on them and all sorts of tat, really, that a plant to survive there. I've got some air plants which are hanging down. I put them above everything else. They hang down and I've still got to remember to dunk them in water every couple of weeks. They're hanging on in there, but they aren't looking brilliant at the moment, I must confess. I get distracted by stuff. And I think I spend enough time in other people's gardens. My own garden, in lockdown, we had guinea pigs, right? And my boys wanted, because we couldn't go anywhere, they said, well, can we let the guinea pigs out of the hutch and the run? I said, okay. At that point, I had lawn and neat borders, right? It's looking good. They ate everything. Had bamboo growing in the garden. And the guinea pigs, 2 guinea pigs, one would bend the stem down, the other would nibble it, and then they swap over. They go, how do they won't know how to do that? And so everything was eaten in the garden, and then they died. I don't think they got poisoned. They were just old age, really. And then Billy, my elder of the 2, he got interested in weeds. So I said, okay, we'll do nothing. And we'll do nothing for 1 whole year and see what grows. And we kind of documented it. And where was lawn, there was like 25 to 30 different species of plant coming through from nowhere, really. And ended up last year with a lot of stuff which was this high, called Guernsey fleabane. It's a bit weedy looking, but it's not found in Fulbourn, right? And none of the neighbouring gardens had it, and I certainly haven't planted any. So where this stuff comes from is fascinating. So yeah, my garden is just neglected. Purposely, I now say proudly. My neighbour Christine says, and what do you do for a living again, Paul? Yeah.
This year I had a whole array of boxes that I had holiday made to find like a complete sort of corner of foxgloves.
Nice.
Nothing to do with me. I hadn't put them there.
Yeah, they do self-seed around. Yes.
Birds and things, but there's just a whole, they're dying now, so it just looks a mess. But for a couple of weeks, it looked really stunning, and I had done nothing.
Brilliant. I love that.
He's very happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that's what I find quite difficult is the balance between not doing anything at all, which I think do nothing at all, but then doing enough to keep it some kind of constant interest. Otherwise, you get lots of stuff flowering in June and then nothing in.
You do. It's really easy to get stuff through the summer months, which it's that early part of spring through to early summer, and then it's from autumn into winter and around to spring. That's the challenges. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody got any recommendations of plants which are good doers? Who?
Conscious, just does it, just, no, they just pay more attention.
Talking of seeds, one of my favourite plants that might do a lot of that is Erigeron carvanskianus, a Mexican fleabane. So it's not like the Guernsey fleabane, which is that high. This is really low. It's like lots of little daisies. They start off one colour, pinkish colour, go white. No, white, start off white and then turn pink as they open up. So you get this multicoloured flowering, little daisy plants, only about a couple of feet off the ground maximum. They'll self-seed everywhere. You see them in sort of seasidey places a lot, growing in rocks and gravel and stuff, but they'll grow in shade and they'll grow in sun. And they will flower from May. When's the last time mine flowered? Last year, year before last, middle of December, it was still flowering, more sporadically. But if you want long season of interest just from some seed, which you can nick off somebody else, because it's just like dust, the seed, it's a cheap fix for getting some wrapping round flowering interest.
For the younger generation that are looking to get into gardening, because like you said, it's kind of dying out. And how would you, if say they don't have parents or grandparents to learn from, how would you encourage them to start kind of learn the arts of gardening?
Yeah, I think this is where schools are really important. And I think certainly Auburn Primary School is very good at, there's a growing space there. They've got a pond space there. So they've kind of improved a lot of that. And lockdown, I think that was very key for them just to kind of keep this thing going. And so they do a lot of outdoor teaching in just the spaces they've got. And I think they've got a couple of key teachers who are really passionate about it. Without it, I don't think it would happen, even if it was properly on the curriculum. I think it's just finding key people who can trigger that, just model something, or get kids in environments where they can see where their food comes from. I mean, Billy, my 9-year-old now, in lockdown, once we were looking at growing stuff and things, he was starting asking where his food came from. He started asking where the meat he was eating came from. I said, do you really want to know? And he said, yeah. And then he was instantly vegetarian, and he still is. So, yeah, I think it's important we know where our food comes from and what's on it, really, particularly the chemicals that are on it. Things like grapes and strawberries, they've got shed loads of horrible chemicals you can't wash off. Anymore. Is it really lunchtime calling now? Yeah, there's a nod. Yeah, to be honest. What time are we due to finish? Oh, we're nearly there. We've just got 6 more minutes of excruciating stomach rumbling to get through. We could stop early if you want. But there might be more questions.
What kind of garden did you create at the flower show?
At the Chelsea Flower Show, oh, that was a good one. I'll give you some background story. Keep it within 6 minutes. So I'd been working for a garden designer in Bedfordshire who made me redundant because he moved up to the island of Skye. And in a fit of pique, I put in this entry to the Chelsea Flower Show, to the RHS, because I'd always tried to persuade him to do it. He always said yes, and we never got as far as doing it. So I just thought, right. And so did it and promptly forgot about it. And because I was in a bolshy frame of mind at the time, at that stage, 2019, yeah, it was the bicentennial of the RHS, and they're inviting applications which link to their history. And because I was in a rather unstably mean frame of mind, I just thought, right. And so I kind of looked at all these precious little gardens at Chelsea that you couldn't get into. You just kind of crane your neck in. You see much more on the telly than you do actually there. And I kind of went back in history and looked at a bunch of people called the Levelers. People come across the Levelers. So you know, at that stage, you know, 200 years before, land was taken, common land was taken off ordinary people and given to people with money. And commoners would have been grazing their animals and growing stuff on it. So there was a whole political backlash to that. And so I used some of that history to pull into this precious bit of turf at Chelsea, which nobody enters into. Oh, how do I keep this short? And so there was a reenactment done, which had been in the papers recently when I was doing this research about somewhere in Essex, a gated community now. It's actually where John Lennon used to live. That's where he had his gold Rolls Royce there. But that had been one of the sites of one of these levelers kind of protests about land occupation a long time ago. And there was an article that local residents have been really supportive of these bunch of people invading the woodland that they had there. And one of them had donated a bath. So they lit a fire under this cast iron bath so they could wash and keep clean. And they camped in the woods for a while. And I was quite captivated by that. And so my garden was an approximation of that. So it had a wood-fired hot tub in it, cedar wood hot tub, which I wasn't allowed to crank up the fire in it. And because it had water in it, even if it wasn't heated, I had to do a whole course on Legionnaire's disease. I now know a lot about Legionnaire's disease, if anybody's interested. Never used that knowledge since. And then it had a pebble mosaic. It had some wood stacked around it as a raised edge to beds, and then just lots of lush planting, lots of bamboo in it. And yeah, it was an extraordinary experience. And that, you meet people, once you're in, right, it's not competitive because anybody or nobody could get a medal. And so I met people at Alan Titchmarsh, and people did telly things from the garden. I'm just thinking, oh, this is grand. But it was tiny. It was only 4.5 by 5.5 meters. Tiny thing. And of course, they're all artificial gardens because they're only geared up to be of interest for that 2 weeks. So the rest of the year, that garden could have had nothing in flower and just plain and boring, really. So it's a bit misleading if you're watching it on telly and you think, I could have that in this tiny space. You can, but it might not kind of persist.
You done many flower shows before that?
No, that was the first and only time. I nearly did it again twice. So I did it again. There was a design I did with a bunch of people with mental health problems, looking at it's called 1 in 6. So the kind of frequency of mental health issues in the community. So I did a project with a bunch of people and we came up with a design which got admitted into Chelsea, but the charity who were funding it folded and couldn't afford to do it. So that was probably a relief, really. But it was an interesting process of that. And then there was another time more recently where I had another application accepted. This was with another charity, but they didn't want to give us a tiny garden. They wanted to give us a big garden. And the big gardens, you need like 2 million quid these days to do a garden there. The little garden I did back in 2019, if I'd have paid for everything, and I didn't because I blagged most things. Dermot Gavin, do you know Dermot Gavin, the garden designer on telly? His first experience of the Chelsea Flower Show was he pitched up with a plot given, no design, no materials, nothing, and he just blagged everything off the people around him. I love that.
You gave it all away.
Yeah, the stuff used to get trashed. After 2019, at the end of that Chelsea Flower Show, you know, the skips would arrive and just huge bits of stone and stuff and big plants would go in. Now there's a sense that they need life beyond the show, which is really important. Like the Great Ormond Street garden from a few years ago, Chris Beardshaw did. I mean, that went into Great Ormond Street and it was just in the middle of this. It was like a light well with, you know, really high buildings all the way around it. And it was just a brilliant little piece of garden. Because at that point, nobody there had any outdoor space to kind of process what was happening for their kids. They had to go off-site to a cafe or whatever. And you don't want to go off-site when you're kind of traumatized and scared and cross. And so this garden became a little space that people could do that within. And it also became a place where kind of staff wanted to have their breaks and it was big enough, they could wheel beds into it as well. So just the power of this tiny little bit of garden surrounded by really high multi-story walls of wards and offices looking into it, really powerful. Yeah. It was a minute. We could stare at each other uncomfortably for a whole minute.
think the Bridgerton Garden's going to Brooks.
The Bridgerton Garden is,
Beach
Yeah.
Cambridge.
do you know which bit of Addenbrooke's it's going in? Because it's a horrible design.
I think it's for the staff, so I don't know.
Oh,
Is
is it? I didn't like that garden design. It's like you get, Bridgerton's like a massive scale, right? And then you condense it down to this little pantomime theatre set, which is, that's the worst bit of Chelsea for me. And it, yeah, it's kind of look odd at Addenbrooke's, I think. And it's just for the staff.
I don't. know.
Right,
No, it's Bridgerton.
right. I mean, it's good that they're getting another garden space there. I'd be surprised if it lasts more than 2 minutes.
Patients and staff.
Right.
Going to be in a courtyard in the hospital grounds. The central outdoor area.
Oh, an outdoor area. It's not the Rose's old garden behind, which is ripe for a change, is it? It's quite a big space, that.
And it is obviously parachuted in, but on the maybe not something.
Yeah. I just thought it was an odd design.
But it captures people. You're talking about capturing the interest of young people. That's the kind of thing that will capture their interest.
Good point. Thank you. I stand corrected. Good point. I think we're done. Is that all right?
Thank you very much.